Today we're going to be looking at lesson 3-2, and it begins on page 143. It'll be a little different at the beginning of this lesson just because you have had these skills, and it's just a real quick review before we hit some of the 6th grade skills. So we're dealing with computing multi-digit decimals, and we're going to look at add, subtract, multiply, and those are review, and then we'll hit and look at dividing with decimals. We'll start with adding. Remember, when we're adding with decimals, what we need to do is we need to take the decimals and we need to line them up so they are one above each other. And then if there's any spaces where there's not a number above or below for adding or subtracting, we put a 0 in there to hold that place. And then we go ahead and do our math, and we do our addition with the decimal in the answer being right underneath the decimals in the problem. The same for the subtraction problem. Line up the decimals. If there's a space, put a 0. And we align these decimals, and we use the decimal, and we align the decimal in the answer in the same place that it was in the original problem. I'm going to go on, and we have a section on page 144. On page 144, we have a check. Let's go ahead and do that. So we would take 356, and there's a decimal, 7, 2, and a 5. And then I'm going to use this number, second number here. I'm going to line up the decimal in the second number, and then I'm going to fill in what we have. I have the 4 here, and we have a 1, a 4, and a 2, and I'm going to add these together. Oh, there's 2 places that do not have anything underneath it, so I'm going to put a 0. So I'm just going to go ahead, 5, this would be a 2, this would be 11, carry the 1. We have a decimal here. We need to make sure we bring that decimal down. And then we have 7, 9, 9, 4. So the decimal here is lined up with the other 2 decimals. They're all in alignment. Your answer is 499 and 125 thousandths. Now, an example for our example now on page 145, we're going to do the example for subtraction. And again, we're going to take a look at this, and I'm going to start with the 356, and then a decimal, and then the 1 and the 8. And then I'm going to take the second number, put the decimal there, make sure they're lined up. Put my line, I'm going to do subtraction. We have a 1, a 4, and a 2. Make sure they're lined up in the correct place value. And then I have the 2, a 5, and a 7. So the 1 and 2 line up, the 8 and the 5 line up, but there's nothing above the 7, so I'm going to put a 0. And then I'm going to go through and I'm going to do my subtraction problem. I can't subtract from here, so I'm going to borrow. So I have a 3, I have a 2. I cannot do anything with the 1 and the 2, so I'm going to borrow, make this a 5, carry over. 11 minus 2 is 9. Then I have decimals, so I'm going to put and align the decimal and put it down below in the answer. 5 minus 2 is 3, 1, 2. So my answer is 213 and 923,000. I'm going to go on to the next page, which is talking about taking a look at a whole number and a decimal in a subtraction problem. So as I'm taking a look at this, I'm going to put 34. And just because this 34 doesn't have a decimal, there is a decimal there. We just generally don't put it in there. But for this case, because I have a decimal in the second number, I'm going to add a decimal here so I can help align my next number. So I have a 9. I put my numbers here. I aligned them. I have a 9, a decimal, a 1, a 4, and a 2. And it is a subtraction problem. I don't have anything here. Remember, we can annex or we can add those zeros. And then I would go ahead and I would do my math. I can't do any zeros here, so I'm going to have to go and borrow. But make this a 3, borrow over, it's a 10, I can make it a 9, borrow over, I'm going to make this a 9 and a 10. So 10 minus 2 is 8, we have a 5, and this is an 8. We have to align the decimals. I cannot take and do 3 and a 9 subtract, so I'm going to borrow. So 13 minus 9 is 4, and then I have a 2. This would be your answer, making sure that you're aligning. Now, let's carry on to multiplying with decimals. Let me just review real quick a couple things. When I'm looking at multiplying with decimals, I'm at page 147, on page 147. When I'm multiplying with decimals, I need to make sure that I just go ahead and do my multiplication, not to worry about the decimals till the very end. So I would take my two numbers and I would put them in a multiplication form, and then I would go ahead and do my multiplication. So I have 3 decimal places here in the first number, 1 decimal place here. So I would take a look at this and say, okay, because I have 4, I have 3 here and 4. That means I have 3 numbers to the right of the decimal place. I have 1 number to the right of the decimal place. I need to add that all together, and so it would make it that there needs to be 4 numbers that need to be to the right of the decimal. So in my answer, if I'm just taking a look at this, I would just end up with 5, a 1, and an 8. But it says I need to have 4. So I need to add a 0, and I need to make sure that I have 1, 2, 3, 4 numbers to the right of the decimal point. So I would put a decimal point and add that 0, annex that 0, to make sure that I have enough spaces to the right of the decimal point in order to answer this multiplication problem. So let's practice a multiplication problem. I'm going on to the next page. And the next page is on 148. And it is 14 and 7/10 times 11 and 361 thousandths. And as I take a look at this, I like to put the longer number at the top, and then I'm going to multiply. I do not have to line up those decimals when I'm multiplying. So I'm going to go ahead and do some multiplication. And as I'm doing that, I'm going to do 7 to 42, put a 4, 21, and 4 is 5, so that's 25, 7, 8, 9, and 7. Remember, if I go to a second number, I put a 0 here to hold the place. Then I do 4 times 1 is 4, 4 times 6 is 24, carry a 2, 4 times 3 is 12, plus 2 is 14, carry a 1, I have 4 plus 1 is 5, 1 times 4 is 4. And I'm going to go to my third number over, so I need to start at my third place. So I'm going to put 2 zeros in order to hold those spots. And then I have 1 times 1, 1 times 6, 1 times 3, 1 times 1, 1 times 1. And then at the end, we're just going to add these up. And as I add them up, I find that I have 1670067. But remember, we had some decimal points up in the original problem. So I need to go back and I need to look, and I have 1, 2, 3 numbers to the right of the decimal point, and I have 1 number to the right of the decimal point in the second number. So that means I need to have 4 numbers in my answer that are to the right of the decimal point. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then in front of that put the decimal. So I would have 167 and 67 10 thousandths. So we would need 4 numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, If I take a look at this, this would be a strange answer, but it is the right answer because I can go ahead and I can check it on my calculator. So let's check. 11,361 done 14 and 7/10, and I would get the same answer, 167 decimal 0067. Continuing on, one thing we need to think about is when we're dividing with decimals. I'm on page 149. When we're dividing with decimals, we need to remember that we can set it up the same way as we did with the other decimal or with the other division problems, with the dividend and divisor in their proper places to get a correct quotient or answer. Now, the thing is with dividing with decimals, it's really cool because if I'm moving the decimal on the outside with the divisor, if I'm moving the decimal, I can move it 2 places here to make a whole number 12. Whole numbers are easier to handle when they're in the divisor. So if I move a decimal 2 places, I can go over here because I would multiply it by 100. I can do the same thing with the dividend. I can multiply by 100 and move the decimal 2 places over. So now the decimal is here between the 0 and the 6. So I would go ahead and I would bring that decimal up above so it's aligned. So we have adding, subtracting, and dividing where we need to make sure the decimals are aligned with the numbers you are using in your problem and your answer. So I would go ahead and I would say, okay, can 12 go into any of these zeros? No. Can 12 go into 6? It cannot. So we're going to add a 0. And remember before we said that if you're dividing, we can't have these remainders, so we can annex it. We can add that 0 and bring it down. And when we add that 0 and bring it down, then we have 60. We know 5 times 12 is 60, so we would have a remainder of 0. So our answer would be 5/100 would be our answer for this division problem. So let's take a look here at our check. And our check on page 150 would be inside our dividend 2.943. So 2 and 943 thousandths divided by 27 hundredths. Now remember we talked about we can divide it. With our division problem, we don't want to leave a decimal, a partial number out here. We want to make sure that we are making this a whole number. So we can multiply by 100. And when we multiply by 100, you can move the decimal 2 places. So now we would have a whole number of 27. But whatever we do outside, we need to make sure that we do the same thing inside to the dividend. So I'm going to put that decimal, when I multiply it by 100, I'm going to move it 2 places over. So we have a new spot, and I need to align it to where it is in the divisor for the quotient. So now we have 294 and 3/10 divided by 27. So if I take a look at this, can 27 go into 2? No. Can it go into 29? Yes, one time. One time it would be 27. Subtract would be 2. I would bring my 4 down. Let's see, we have a 3 we need to bring down. Can 27 go into 243? I have to back it up there, sorry. So I brought the 4 down. 27 can't go into 24, so I put the 0. But the next thing is we have another number, 3, so bring down the 3. Can 27 go into 243? Yes, it can, 9 times. 9 times 27 is 243. We would have a remainder of 0. So our answer would be 10 and 9/10. And how do we know that? We could check it. 10 and 9/10 times 27 will give you 294 and 3/10. Let's check that on the calculator to be sure. So 10 and 9/10 times 27, and it's going to give us 294 and 3/10.